All right, so we're diving into the Big Short today. Talk about a wild ride. Subprime mortgages, the housing bubble, the whole financial system teetering on the brink.
It's crazy how a seemingly small corner of the market could trigger such a massive global crisis.
It's like a domino effect, right?
No.
One wrong move and the whole thing goes crashing down.
Exactly. And the book does a great job of introducing us to the key players, the ones who saw it coming, those who profited from it, and those who ultimately paid the price.
Let's start with Steve Eisman. This guy went from lawyer to finance whiz, but he always had this deep skepticism about the whole mortgage bond scene.
He was already wary of the system, but a personal tragedy, the loss of his infant son, really shifted his perspective. It made him obsessed with understanding risk.
Like he needed to find a way to make sense of the chaos.
Right. And that obsession led him to uncover some serious cracks in the system. His colleague, Vinnie Daniel, was the one who noticed some troubling trends in those mobile home loans.
Yeah, people were defaulting like crazy, and it wasn't just a few isolated cases.
Vinnie realized that these defaults were a symptom of a much larger problem with the entire subprime lending industry.
So, subprime lending. What was the thinking there?
The idea was to empower lower-income families by giving them access to home loans, but it quickly turned into a fast buck scheme.
It sounds like they were setting people up to fail.
Intention is a tricky thing, but the structure of those loans practically guaranteed defaults down the line.
So it was just a matter of time before the whole thing blew up. And how did this risky business model spread so quickly?
Well, that's where the originate and sell model comes in.
Ah, yes, the financial equivalent of hot potato.
Lenders could churn out these questionable loans and then pass them off to Wall Street, washing their hands of any consequences.
And Wall Street was happy to gobble them up.
Absolutely. Firms like Lehman Brothers were buying up subprime lenders left and right, packaging these loans into complex securities and then selling them off to investors. It was all about generating quick profits with little regard for the long-term risks.
And while all this was happening, Mike Burry was quietly studying the market, seeing the subprime bubble forming.
Burry's an interesting character. He has Asperger's, and the book portrays that as both a challenge and an advantage in this world.
It gave him this incredible ability to focus and see patterns that others missed.
Exactly, like his early investment in Avant Corporation. The company was in trouble, but Burry saw through the noise and recognized its hidden value.
Which led to a tenfold return when Avant was acquired. Talk about a validation of his unconventional approach.
It reinforced his belief in his own analytical abilities. So when he turned his attention to this subprime mess, he knew he was onto something big.
He was convinced it was going to implode, but how do you bet against an entire market?
That's where credit default swaps come in.
Okay, time for a quick Econ 101 lesson. What exactly are these credit default swaps?
Imagine insurance policies on those subprime mortgage bonds.
Okay, I'm following.
Burry realized he could essentially buy insurance on these bonds, knowing they were bound to fail. So as more people defaulted on their mortgages, the value of those swaps would go up.
It's a pretty clever strategy, but who was selling him this insurance? It's not like people were lining up to bet against the American housing market.
That's a question that haunted Burry for a while. Who was on the other side of these trades? What did they know that he didn't?
A mystery for the ages, or at least for the next part of our deep dive. But let's shift gears back to Eisman and his team.
They were knee-deep in this subprime labyrinth when they encountered a character who could sell sand in the Sahara, Greg Littman.
Ah, yes, Lippmann, the smooth-talking Deutsche Bank bond trader. Wasn't he practically begging people to short the subprime market? Something about stupid Germans.
He was a fascinating contradiction, profiting from the very system he was warning people about.
Playing both sides, huh? Sounds risky.
It was a delicate balancing act. He knew these bonds were toxic, but he used his salesmanship and, yes, even humor to convince others to bet against them.
And who takes the bait? Cornwall Capital. Three guys with limited experience running a tiny hedge fund out of a Berkeley garage.
Their story is the stuff of Wall Street legend. They stumbled upon Littman's presentation, initially thought it was crazy, and then, well, let's just say they saw the light.
And ended up making a massive bet against the market. These guys were anything but conventional. Didn't they do a character reference check on Capital One's CEO?
That's right. They dug into his personal life, trying to figure out if he was a crook.
Talk about due diligence.
They weren't afraid to get their hands dirty, to look beyond the polished facades and fancy presentations.
They understood that in this market, trust was a luxury they couldn't afford.
They saw through the smoke and mirrors, recognizing that Wall Street was operating in a world where the line between reality and illusion was dangerously blurred.
And to capture that feeling, Lewis uses a brilliant analogy in the book, the Venetian casino.
Ah, yes, the Venetian.
So how does a casino relate to the subprime mortgage market?
Well, think about it. The flashing lights, the endless rows of slot machines, that sense of excitement and possibility. It's a metaphor for the irrational exuberance of the subprime bubble.
The illusion of control, the belief that you're in charge, when in reality, the house always wins.
Exactly. And while everyone's caught up in this casino-like atmosphere, Eisman has a bit of an epiphany.
Does this epiphany involve a roulette wheel?
Yeah.
Or maybe a Wayne Newton impersonator?
Not quite. His anger at the system evolves into a quest for understanding. He goes from wanting to just profit from the market's downfall to trying to unravel the web of deception that made it all possible.
He's like a financial detective, right?
Right.
Trying to follow the money and expose the bad guys.
Exactly. And his investigation leads him straight to the gatekeepers of risk, those all-important rating agencies. You know, Moody's and Standard & Poor's.
The ones who are supposed to be the impartial judges assessing the risk of all these complex securities. But what Eisman discovers is anything but reassuring.
Yeah, he finds analysts who are overworked, maybe a little too cozy with the Wall Street firms they're supposed to be keeping an eye on.
It's like the fox guarding the hen house, right?
He even uses the term brain dead to describe some of the analysts, which is pretty harsh, but it highlights that disconnect between the complexity of the securities and the expertise of those evaluating them.
So these agencies, with their fancy AAA ratings and aura of authority, were basically asleep at the wheel while the whole system was heading for disaster.
Well, it begs the question, were they deliberately complicit or just victims of their own flawed models? And Wall Street was pretty good at manipulating those models, let's be honest.
It's a bit of a chicken or the egg situation, isn't it?
Mm.
But meanwhile, Michael Burry is facing his own set of problems. He's sitting on this billion-dollar bet, waiting for the dominoes to fall, but his investors are freaking out.
Yeah, they're doubting his sanity, demanding their money back. Talk about bad timing. They just couldn't see the bigger picture.
It's like he's got this crystal ball showing him the future, but no one believes him.
It highlights this tension between short-term thinking and long-term vision.
Instant gratification versus delayed gratification. And I guess in the world of high finance, patience isn't exactly a virtue.
Right. And Burry, how does he respond? He doesn't sugarcoat anything. He just sends this terse email. You're welcome. Classic Burry.
Love it. But back to Eisman. What's he uncovering about the rating agencies?
Well, they were supposed to be using these sophisticated models, right? But it turns out they were working with incomplete data. Wall Street had figured out how to game the system, how to cherry-pick data points to make their offerings look better than they were.
It's all smoke and mirrors, isn't it?
Yeah.
A magician's trick.
Exactly. And the rating agencies, they were so focused on the numbers in front of them that they missed the bigger picture.
They couldn't see the forest for the trees.
And there's this great scene where Vinnie Daniel, he's practically begging a Moody's analyst to demand more data, to push back against Wall Street, but she just doesn't get it.
It's a classic example of the power dynamics at play. Wall Street was calling the shots, and the rating agencies weren't willing to rock the boat.
Right. And this brings us to another major player, Joe Cassano, the head of AIG FP. This is the division of AIG that was selling those credit default swaps that Burry was buying.
Oh yeah, Cassano, the guy who seemed to have no idea what he was getting into.
He was a force of nature, ruled his division with an iron fist, demanded absolute loyalty.
Sounds intense.
It was. The book describes this crazy scene where one of his traders is forced to chant, "It's your fing money, Joe."
Wow, talk about a toxic work environment. But beyond the bluster and intimidation, Cassano also seemed to have this fundamental misunderstanding of risk. He really believed that house prices could never fall nationwide, which made those swaps seem like easy money.
And that blind faith, that refusal to acknowledge the possibility of a housing crash, well, that's what ultimately led to AIG FP's downfall.
They were writing all these credit default swaps, insuring billions of dollars worth of bonds without understanding the risk they were taking on.
Right. And even when the warning signs started flashing, Cassano just doubled down. A classic case of overconfidence. But there was one guy, Gene Park, one of Cassano's top lieutenants, who saw the danger. He even threatened to quit if they didn't stop writing these deals.
That's got to take guts to stand up to a guy like Cassano. Did Cassano even listen?
Not at first. He accused Park of being lazy, insubordinate, But eventually, Cassano started having meetings with Wall Street firms, and it was like a light bulb went off. He finally saw the greed, the recklessness, the whole house of cards.
So he finally wakes up, smells the coffee, crisis averted.
If only. They made a huge mistake. They stopped writing new swaps, but they didn't get rid of their existing exposure.
So they were still on the hook for billions of dollars.
Ouch. Yep. And while AIG FP is wrestling with this, Cornwall Capital is facing a different kind of challenge, convincing anyone to take them seriously. They're trying to short a multi-trillion-dollar market from a garage in Berkeley.
David versus Goliath. Except Goliath has all these fancy financial weapons and an army of lawyers.
They were incredibly persistent. They ended up bringing in this former Wall Street guy, Ben Hockett, who helped them get access to the big leagues.
So they could finally place their bets.
Huh.
But even then, they were still riddled with doubt. Who's the idiot on the other side of this trade?
That's the million-dollar question. And to find the answer, they end up in Las Vegas.
Vegas. I'm picturing blackjack tables, showgirls.
Not quite. They're attending this big finance conference, the American Securitization Forum. It's a gathering of all the major players in the subprime market.
So you've got Cornwall Capital, these small-time investors, surrounded by all these high rollers who are seemingly making a killing off of a system that's about to implode.
It's this surreal scene. Charlie Ledley, one of Cornwall's founders, describes it as being in the belly of the beast.
Everyone's partying on the Titanic, oblivious to the iceberg.
Exactly. And then there's this guy, John Devaney, a hedge fund manager, who delivers this drunken rant, calling everyone out, accusing them of running a giant Ponzi scheme.
So even in this sea of delusion, there were a few voices of reason.
A few, yeah. But Devaney's outburst was quickly dismissed. The party went on.
Denial is a powerful drug. And while everyone's living it up in Vegas, Eisman and his team, they're getting worried about the big banks.
Right. Their investigation leads them to this unsettling conclusion. A lot of these institutions don't really understand how much they're exposed to the subprime market. Their models are so complex, they've lost touch with reality.
It's like building a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. Looks impressive until the tide comes in.
Perfect analogy. And then there's Eisman's meeting with the CEO of Bank of America. Eisman walks away with this blunt assessment. Oh my God, he's dumb.
Not exactly a vote of confidence. So you've got these financial titans playing a dangerous game completely in the dark. And that brings us to Howie Hubler, the Morgan Stanley trader who made one of the biggest bets in history and lost big time. This guy Hubler, he puts all his chips on the table, bets big against the housing market, but then he does something really strange.
Yeah, he starts selling those credit default swaps on these AAA-rated CDOs, bundles of mortgage debt, but supposedly structured to be super safe.
So he's betting against the housing market, but also ensuring these supposedly safe investments, kind of like having your cake and eating it too, right?
It was risky, for sure. Hubler thought those AAA CDOs were rock solid, but he didn't see how interconnected everything was.
He didn't realize if subprime went down, it would take everything else with it, even those supposedly safe bets.
And, of course, that's exactly what happened. The subprime market implodes, Hubler CDOs go belly up, and Morgan Stanley is left holding this massive bag, a $9 billion hole in their balance sheet.
$9 billion with a B. That's got to hurt. But what's crazy is that even as the market is crashing around him, Hubler refuses to admit he's wrong.
Denial's a powerful thing. He's clinging to his model, saying his CDOs are still valuable even though their prices are plummeting.
It's like watching someone try to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon.
And that denial wasn't just Hubler, it was all over Wall Street. Remember that disastrous conference call John Mack had with investors? He couldn't even explain how Morgan Stanley had lost so much money.
Total loss of credibility. It's like the emperor has no clothes. Suddenly everyone realizes that the system is built on nothing but hot air.
And as the crisis spreads, banks stop lending to each other, the credit markets freeze up, the whole financial system is grinding to a halt.
Talk about a domino effect. So what happens? Does the whole thing just collapse?
Well, that's when the government steps in with those massive bailouts, TARP, TALF, all those programs designed to prop up those failing institutions.
So they basically just threw money at the problem. Did it work?
It probably prevented a total meltdown, but it came at a huge cost. Essentially, they shifted the risk from Wall Street to the American taxpayer.
Not exactly a fair trade, is it?
Like giving a drunk driver a new car after they've crashed the old one, it doesn't fix the underlying issue.
And in the end, who actually made money from this whole mess?
Well, a few people did. Those who bet against the market, Burry Eisman, Cornwall Capital, those guys walked away with a fortune.
Can you really celebrate a win when the whole world is losing?
That's something Burry struggled with. He didn't feel any joy from it. He called the whole experience morbid, and Jamie Mai from Cornwall Capital was worried that they were actually betting against the future of capitalism.
That's a pretty sobering thought. So what's the big takeaway from all this? What should our listeners be thinking about after this deep dive into The Big Short?
It's about human nature, really, about greed and hubris and the danger of getting too caught up in complexity. It shows how even the experts can be wrong, how models can fail, and why you should always be skeptical even when everyone's telling you everything is fine.
Don't believe the hype, question everything. Great advice.
The decisions we make in the financial world have real-world consequences. It's all interconnected, and The Big Short is a powerful reminder of just how fragile the whole system really is.
Thanks for walking us through this financial thriller. It's a story that's both fascinating and terrifyingly relevant. A reminder that we're all players in this game, whether we like it or not.
Exactly, and hopefully, by understanding what happened back then, we can prevent it from happening again.